Hello, gentle listeners, and thank you for tuning in to another broadcast of Hex Radio. Tonight is going to be a very special sort of episode. You see, in my very first, I told you all that if you encountered a problem and you needed advice, you could come to me, and tonight I'm going to make good on that promise. You see, one listener has suffered a tragedy in their life. Their brother was in an accident, and him and his wife and son are in the hospital, and their daughter, this listener's niece, is unfortunately died. So, for this episode, I am going to do the spell first, and then we will talk about what we need to. Before we begin, let me briefly, and I do mean briefly, go over the different kinds of spirits. There are the spirits who know they are dead, like my mother. They will appear occasionally, interfere with your life a little bit, as though they're just dropping by for a visit. They're the ones who, when you look at them, appear to be completely normal, just ghostly apparitions of an ordinary person. And then they're the ones who don't know that they're dead. They're the ones who are either stuck in loops or wander about, bloodshot, looking like they did when they died. And when they died, I mean post-mortem, not briefly before whatever it was killed them. Now, spirits who do know they are dead can occasionally forget. This seems to be a consequence of the afterlife, something about being in a world where they can live and simply act as though they aren't dead will occasionally make them forget. Now, I do have to remind my mother, when she shows up, hair mess, looking, well, ghastly. But it doesn't happen too often anymore. Now that I've covered that, when you're dealing with a spirit, you want to be as calm as possible. Not emotionless, mind you, just calm. You see, they can feed off of your energy, your emotions, and you don't want to feed them anything negative. You also don't want to rile them up. So just be calm. To send a spirit on, one of the first things you're going to want is a candle, white preferably, a pillar, and a quiet area. If you have a picture of your loved one, you will need that. If not, something that belonged to them. If you can't even manage that, write their name down on a piece of paper. Put it beneath the candle. If it's a picture or something that they owned, you place it in front of the candle. Now, you light your candle. Place it in a window where you can sit in front of it. And you want to wait until the candle burns out. This can take a while. Now, I'm not saying wait until your candle burns all the way down, just until the wick goes out. You do need to keep an eye on your candle. Other things you might want to prepare is a favorite snack or something that this loved one liked. Music, flowers, candy, a stuffed animal, just things that they enjoyed in life. And you want to talk to them. You want to tell them how much they mean to you, how much you love them, how much you'll miss them. You want to make sure that they understand that they need to move on, that lingering here will only cause both themselves and other people nothing but sorrow and pain. This can be difficult. It took me years to be able to bring myself to say this to my mother. It took me years to let go of my own guilt and say this to my mother. But you, gentle listener, I believe that you can manage this. Sit there in front of your candle, facing the window, surrounded by the things that they loved, and tell them that everything will be all right, that everything on the other side will be all right, that they will be safe, that they will be protected, that they will not become lost or hurt or injured, that everything will be better now, that you will miss them and that you still love them, but that they need to move on. You need to move on. This isn't a spell so much in the traditional sense. It's not even much of a blessing. But when you lose someone, they tend to hang around you after their death. And this is the best chance you've got if they are the type who would try to cling to life and linger, to convince them to move on, at least before it becomes a problem. Because it can become a problem. Poltergeists are not anything anyone wants to deal with, and no one wants to be haunted by somebody that they loved, watching that spirit become corrupted by its desperate need to cling to a life that it can no longer cling to. Because deep down, at the very heart of it, that's the way people are. We cling to life, even when we think we let go of it. On a very personal note, not that this hasn't been personal enough with the talk of my mother, but if anyone out there has experienced suicidal tendencies and has actually attempted to go through with it, then you might know what it's like when you hit that moment where your brain realizes that you're about to die, and suddenly every instinct kicks in screaming that it won't let you. This is what can cause a ghost to go bad, because they're already dead, so their instincts are screaming at all times, "No, I will not go." It can be dangerous. Which is why your best bet is always to work as quickly as possible with letting them know to move on, especially if you're untrained in magic. You don't want to take unnecessary risks. Otherwise, you need to find somebody who's very practiced with working with spirits. You really don't want to have a spirit develop an attachment if they are the type that will try to hurt you. No, my mother is very attached to both me and my husband, but I dealt with her my entire life. I'm trained in magic, and I know how to properly deal with her now. And so it's a very different sort of situation. Just because something works for me doesn't mean it will work for others. Continuing on this rather somber sort of note, another gentle listener wondered what I thought about the train of thought where people get that nothing in the world matters because it's all just objects and everyone dies and you make no impact. And yes, this is true. Everyone dies. No one is permanent. And you can hope as much as you want to leave some sort of permanent mark on the world, but you could fail. But that's because you're thinking of a permanent mark as something physical that you can see, or something that people talk about. Like writing a book, or starring in a movie, or making a ridiculous ton of money. That's the kind of thing that people think of as accomplishments. When in reality, what you should really look to is the marks you leave on other people. My mother, at the very end, was not in the right state of mind to leave a very good impression, unfortunately. Thank the gods that in the afterlife she was able to return back to her previous self. It was the marks that she made on my life before she got to that state that shaped the way I thought of her afterwards. When I think of my mother, I don't think of her sick and dying and out of her mind. I think of her when she was alive and vibrant and happy and dancing and smiling, painting her nails and doing her makeup and spraying perfumes that gave me headaches. Those are the kinds of marks you will leave on other people's lives. Those are the kinds of things that matter. And yes, you might die when they die. They can't pass on their memories of you. But if you're very lucky, then they'll pass on the feelings that you left them. They'll do for other people what you did for them, and in that way, you'll both continue to live on. If you have any other questions for me, or you just want to yell at me for being a complete downer this episode, then feel free to take a toothpick and write in the soil after a fresh rain exactly what you want me to see. Later that night, once the bats come out from hiding, they'll deliver your message. If, by some crazy happenstance, this episode has helped you in any way, feel free to send a tip or a donation. Just pour a cup of coffee. I'm sure you all know that I have a thing for extra sweet coffee at this point. Put it in your freezer, and I'll get it. Don't worry. This very special episode of Hex Radio was brought to you by the Lavender Town Tower. Feel free to lay your spirits to rest. Thank you again for listening, and I'm sorry for the particular way this episode has gone. It's just a bit difficult to be happy when you need to talk about death. If any of you feel like reaching out, don't be afraid to. There are plenty of phone numbers that you can use to contact people who will know exactly what they need to do to help you. Whether it's just to talk about your grief, or talk about your suicidal tendencies, or simply just to talk. Thank you for enduring this parade of sadness. Have a good night, gentle listener, and happy hauntings.